Jonathan, we ready to go? Okay, good evening, everyone. First of all, a big thanks to Busboys and Poets, in particular Andy Shalal and his team for hosting us. We've been having this long-standing collaboration since the genocide in Gaza began. We bring speakers to Georgetown, and some of them end up here for further conversation and discussion. Busboys and Poets has become a community space for us to gather, to talk about, to organize, to commiserate collectively, and hopefully find solutions to the problems of our world. Not just in Gaza, but critically here in the United States. And we're all in Andy's debt for opening the doors of his wonderful bookstore and restaurant so that we can do these things. So I want to begin with that acknowledgement. Today's topic is the subject of genocide in Gaza in historical and comparative perspective. And of course, the timing of this could not be more ideal for two reasons. One, Benjamin Netanyahu is in town today. The man who bears command and control responsibility for this horrific genocide that we've been seeing. And hopefully we will all live to see him in the dock one day in The Hague facing a war crimes prosecutor. Secondly, this topic is ideal because we have a wonderful guest in town from England who is a leading scholar of genocide with impeccable scholarly credentials, Professor Martin Shaw. We brought Martin Shaw as part of our Gaza lecture series because we thought we needed someone to talk about this genocide in a global perspective and in a comparative perspective. And when I spoke to my colleagues in genocide studies, who would be the best person to give a talk on this topic, Martin Shaw's name was at the top of the list, and so we're thankful that he's here from England with his wife to participate in this conversation. Martin Shaw is a historical sociologist who's written widely on war, genocide, and global politics and social movements. The books that he has written, many books that bear on this topic, are War and Genocide, Genocide and International Relations, What is Genocide? And most recently, The New Age of Genocide, Intellectual and Political Challenges After Gaza, published by Columbia University Press and due for release next month. If you look at the book, and there's a flyer there which I think has a discount code, there's a wonderful blurb from someone who we have hosted here at Busboys and Poets, Francesca Albanese, who, as you all know or should know, is the UN Special Rapporteur for Human Rights in the occupied territories. Martin said that the publication of the book was delayed because they were awaiting a blurb from Francesca, and I think it was worth the wait. In terms of his formal biography, Professor Shaw is Emeritus Professor of International Relations and Politics at the University of Sussex and a research professor at the Barcelona Institute for International Studies. Previously, he held a chair in sociology at Hull University in the UK, and more recently his scholarship and intellectual and scholarly contributions were recognized when he received a Lifetime Achievement Award in 2021 from the International Network of Genocide Scholars. He's a public intellectual as well. Last week he published an important essay in Zeteo. He also published a new article that I'm going to ask him about tonight in the Journal of Genocide Research. It's wonderful to have him here at this dark time, especially given the fact that he had to travel a long way, and especially given the time difference, because according to my clock, it's what, somewhere near 11 o'clock in the evening? Indeed. In your normal home, so I appreciate you staying up late for this conversation. Thank you for being here, Martin. It's wonderful. We're going to just talk about your work. We're going to talk about Gaza. We're going to talk about trying to understand this genocide. And so the first question is a broad question. I'd like you to take some time to answer it. It's really based on the title of your new article in the Journal of Genocide Research called, it's on Gaza, and it's called The Genocide That Changed the World. So the broad question for you is, how has the genocide in Gaza, in specific terms, changed the world?
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you got to hold it fairly close.
Right, okay. Yeah. Well, first of all, before I answer the question, I'd just like to say how grateful I am to you, Nader, and to Andy and the bookstore for holding this event tonight. And it's really inspiring to see that there are people, coming out for these sort of discussions regularly. And I know you're facing a very difficult situation in the States at the moment, but I don't think we have quite the equivalent where we are. So it really is good to see that, even the circumstances are very dark. And actually, you mentioned Netanyahu and being here in town as well, and The Hague. And I was supposed to be going on from here to The Hague for an unofficial trial that a body called the Court of the Citizens of the World are going to hold of Netanyahu on the same charges that the ICC have brought against him. And they were going to ask me to be an expert witness. Unfortunately, this trial has had to be postponed until December, but it will happen, and it will be a public indictment of him for his role. And I don't think anything that's happening at the moment is going to change the seriousness of the charges against him. So you asked what has the genocide changed? I think what it has changed is really the perception of the West and of the United States particularly, but not just of the United States, of Western countries in general, in the rest of the world, and indeed among many of the citizens, our own citizens in our own countries, because this genocide is the first genocide of recent times in which the West has not only been indirectly complicit or involved at the margins or failed to prevent, but it's a genocide in which Western countries, above all the US, are directly involved. And where your government and our government and other Western governments are responsible in a pretty direct way for much of what Israel is doing in Gaza. And it's also a genocide which I think is changing the perception of genocide as something which happens in distant places that we don't know very much about. Obviously we should know about Sudan, we should know about Ethiopia, we should know about Myanmar. We should know about all these places where genocidal violence has been happening in recent years and is happening today, especially in the case of Sudan. But we don't, and our media and even our public debates, even the more serious public debates, don't really touch very much on these things. But here we have genocide being live streamed, despite the fact that the Israeli government has murdered so many Palestinian journalists, despite the fact that they have excluded international journalists. The citizen journalists in Gaza and the ordinary citizens of Gaza have provided us constantly with the imagery, that shows beyond doubt the terrible atrocities and the extent of the atrocities that Israel is committing. So I think this is quite different in a way from previous episodes of genocide, where sadly a lot of what has happened out of sight. Here, it's happening. Although the mainstream media, the legacy media, are not in most cases covering it at all properly, it has got through. It's cut through because there has been so much over such a long period of time. It has made it into the minds even of, people who support the Republican Party in the United States. A significant proportion, I think, now regard what's happening in Gaza as genocide. Even in other countries and among supporters of right-wing parties, this is the case. And in the general population in the US, in the UK, and in other countries, something like half the population now recognize what's happening as genocide. So this is a very big change for Western countries, that we recognize our own governments, our own countries, as being involved in a genocide which is happening in real time, directed by what's supposed to be a key Western ally, and with the permission of our leaders. So that I think that's my first stab at that answer. Yeah.
So when did you? I mean, you have the distinction of being one of the early scholars of genocide to look at what's happening in Gaza and say early on that it looks like this is a genocide. You and Raz Siegel, like early on, within the first month, sort of have written pieces on this topic. Is that correct?
The first week, in fact.
The first week.
Yeah.
So how do you respond to the accusation that, look, you were too quick off the mark here to sort of make a determination, an accusation of this weight that Israel is committing genocide within the first week, before anything had really happened yet? So how do you respond to that accusation?
Well, it wasn't the case that nothing had really happened. No.
Okay. Well, tell us remind us what happened.
Unfortunately, within 48 hours of October the 7th, the IDF were pounding Gaza with phenomenally powerful bombs, and the civilians of Gaza were starting to die in very significant numbers. The death toll in the first weeks of the so-called war was actually greater than it has been at any point since, even though we could see every week at the present time 70 or 100, every day even something like 70 people are killed. But in those first weeks it was even higher. And but my understanding of what was happening, I mean, obviously, yes, it was informed by the fact that I knew that Israel had conducted previous wars, mini-wars against Gaza, and that these wars have been exceptionally brutal. Mm-hmm. Hundreds, in one or two cases, even thousands of civilians have been killed. Whole neighborhoods have been razed to the ground. So something of what is happening now had already occurred. And so my understanding was informed by a knowledge of that. And I knew that this sort of thing had happened because Hamas and other organizations had fired rockets into Israel, and tiny numbers of Israeli civilians and soldiers had been killed. You know, in some cases just a handful had been killed, and yet Israel had carried out these brutal, punitive expeditions or assaults on Gaza. So my immediate impression was that after Hamas attacks on the 7th of October, in which hundreds of Israelis died, hundreds of civilians died, that the reaction was certain to be much greater. So I was expecting this, and when we saw the first reports of the bombing, and when we listened to Netanyahu and President Herzog and all sorts of other leaders of the Israeli government, it was very clear that they were talking in genocidal language. We'd had this language before, but before we hadn't had it combined with the level of assault that was beginning. And so this is why I warned within days of this starting that we were very likely seeing a genocide. And of course, it was also informed by my understanding of the way that Israel had attempted over decades and decades to eliminate the Palestinians from areas of their country, and to carry on removing Palestinians. So I knew that and for me this was a genocidal process, because genocide is defined as the deliberate destruction of a group, and for me that is the deliberate destruction of a group in the place in which they live, in the as a society, with their way of life. And so this wasn't new. What was new was the level of murderousness and the level of explicit intent to carry on killing and destroying. That was new. So these were some of the reasons. I mean, other reasons to do with the history of colonial warfare and genocide, where often if the colonized, the oppressed, attack and kill some of the colonizers, and especially their civilians, you get this huge overreaction. That's a historical trend which is very well documented in many cases. So all this understanding together made me feel that we were in for something that was definitely genocidal. What obviously I didn't know was at the time was how long this would go on, and to what extent it would be taken. I mean, I didn't quite see any endpoint, any obstacles in Israel's way, but I suppose even at that stage, I wouldn't have quite anticipated that we would have seen the extent that we have of this terrible, terrible killing and destruction.
So in your journal article essay, you have a really good discussion that I want to ask you about the distinction between war versus genocide. And you use the comparison of the U.S. Intervention in Vietnam. And so I just want to remind the audience, the U.S. intervention in Vietnam was a brutal affair. Most of my students don't know what the Vietnam War was about, but it lasted roughly from 1955 to 1975. 2 million Vietnamese were killed by the United States. Large sections of that country were turned into a parking lot. But you say that intervention that killed 2 million people does not constitute a genocide, but the 65,000 or more Palestinians who've been killed in the last 2 years by Israel is a genocide. Could you explain the difference?
Well, yeah, it's a good question. It has never been understood that genocide is a simple matter of numbers. You can have a genocide of a relatively small number of people, and you can have a war which kills huge numbers of people, huge numbers of civilians, and certainly the Vietnam War did. So that isn't the question, and it's also the case that many of the methods of war and of genocide, in our age at least, are very similar. You know, the sort of bombing that Israel is doing of Gaza is also the sort of bombing that the US did of Vietnam. So that really isn't the difference. And I'm not trying to say that what happened in Vietnam was any less terrible than what is happening in Gaza, because I'm of a generation that actually I was there. Well, no, I wasn't in Vietnam, fortunately, but I was there on the streets of London, protesting and organising protests against the Vietnam War in the late 1960s, and so I know full well what was involved there. But what I was saying was, in my article, was that while some episodes in the Vietnam War, I think certainly could be called genocidal, like the My Lai massacre, overall, the intention of the United States in that conflict was to destroy and defeat the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese, and to bolster the South Vietnam government, which was an anti-communist regime, which the US helped keep in pace. So the US aim wasn't to destroy any sort of Vietnamese society or state. It was to destroy the sort of Vietnamese society and state which they didn't like. In Gaza, essentially what Israel has been doing is to try to eliminate the Palestinian society as a whole and any prospect of a Palestinian, further Palestinian rule in that territory. And we see today that although there's a lot of fine words about peace from President Trump, the plan is to replace any sort of Palestinian administration of Gaza with an international body nominated by Trump himself with the approval of Netanyahu, and to essentially complete the genocide in a different way. So to the extent that we can even, of course, take this plan seriously, because there probably are fantastical elements to it as well. But the aim, Israel's aim, is not to allow a different sort of Palestinian state or a different sort of Palestinian rule. Is not to have a Palestinian society. Donald Trump's aim is not to have a Palestinian society. We know that he and his son-in-law have been involved in these discussions to eliminate the Palestinian society altogether and replace it by the Trump Riviera or some sort of beachfront development. So this is why I think there's something overall different, even though the atrocities are very comparable, and I wouldn't want to minimize in any way what happened in Vietnam.
Okay, so I want to turn to the most controversial part of your analysis of the genocide in Gaza, where you write that Israel's genocide in Gaza began as a counter-genocide in response to the subaltern genocidal massacres by Hamas on October the 7th. You write that the Gaza genocide is in fact a co-production of Israel and Hamas. I want to dig deep into this argument, but could you explain what you mean by that?
Yeah, I think it's important to explain this, because obviously it's for many people this what I'm saying is counterintuitive, and I am not in any way trying to minimize the extent of the prior repression and oppression of the Palestinians, the terrible situation which the blockade before 2023 placed the people of Gaza in. I mean, this is very clear. Or the legitimacy of Palestinian resistance, including armed resistance. Clearly, in international law, the Palestinians have the right to resist, including armed resistance against the oppression which Israel has imposed upon them. No, what I am drawing attention to, though, is what I alluded to before, which is that the right of resistance doesn't imply the right to massacre civilians, and the fact that Hamas, in some respects, can be counted as a resistance organization doesn't legitimate its tactics or what we make out of its strategy on October the 7th. As somebody who studies genocide, I have to take account of the fact that any deliberate mass killing of civilians of a particular ethnic or national or religious group can count as genocidal, and clearly Hamas and the other organizations that took part did kill Israeli civilians en masse because they saw them as Israelis. I mean, they caught up some Thai workers and other people who weren't Israelis in that, but that was the basic way in which I think they identified those who were killed and those who were taken hostage. And I think this is not only an illegitimate strategy. I think many people would agree that these constitute war crimes. What I am pointing out is that by identifying targets in that way, they were applying a genocidal logic. This was, of course, in comparison to what we've seen subsequently, this is a very small event. I mean, because Hamas carried this on for less than 2 days, Israel has now carried out a hugely greater campaign of destruction and killing for almost 2 years. So I think if you look at the numbers involved, Israel has probably killed something like 100 times as many Palestinians as Hamas killed Israelis. So I'm not trying to at all to minimize those differences. I'm not trying to say there was a double genocide. What I am trying to say, though, is that the genocidal character of what Hamas did, even though it was limited, even it was necessarily limited, Hamas never had the capacity to do anything more than that. In fact, they probably did more than they thought they had the capacity to do because of Israel's incompetence and failure to defend its border. This provoked, really, in the beginning anyway, the assault which Israel carried out. This was, Avi Shleim points out, this was the first Gaza war that was initiated on the Palestinian side. And I just think that the way it was initiated was calculated almost to lead Israel to respond in this grossly disproportionate and genocidal way, in this mega genocidal way, really, to wipe out the Palestinian society in Gaza. That was what I feared at the time, and this is what has come to pass. And it raises questions, I think, about whether. It raises questions about. I called it a co-production because I think Hamas should have understood this. If I, as a British academic who's read a lot about genocides, could understand, and who's read quite a lot about Palestine, could understand, and Gaza, could understand that doing the sort of thing they did in southern Israel would lead to this huge reaction from Israel, then I think the Hamas leadership must have understood this. And Hamas is not an organization which has very strong democratic credentials, and it's an authoritarian organization. It's an organization which I think doesn't value the life of ordinary Palestinians as much as one would have hoped that a resistance movement would. If we compare, Palestine is often compared to South Africa. We don't see in the history of the African National Congress and the South African movement, even though they did have an armed struggle and they did carry out bombings which killed small numbers of civilians, that they never conducted anything like this. And I think that is possibly one of the reasons why the apartheid regime never escalated their response in the same way. So this is the sort of thinking behind my analysis here. I'm not in any way trying to minimize or equate the Gaza genocide, which had been going on for 2 years, with the actions of Hamas, but to show that there was a relationship between them.
Well, here's where I think the difference or the criticism lies from this is what I hear from others with respect to this argument that you've just articulated. That October the 7th, there were atrocities committed by Hamas, yes. War crimes committed by Hamas, yes. Even crimes against humanity committed by Hamas, yes. But you're saying it was a subaltern genocidal massacre, implying, if we're true to the term, that part of Hamas's intention on October the 7th was to kill in whole or in part and a group of people, in this case Israelis. Where's the proof that that was part of the intention? Because you're calling it a genocidal massacre, and genocide implies intention to kill in whole or in part. So how would you respond?
I would respond by saying that this was clearly a very, very deliberate action. That I mean, people have obviously pointed out and emphasised the extent to which Israel was itself involved in this killing of Israelis. So we have the Hannibal Directive. We have the knowledge that certainly a significant number of the Israeli victims were actually killed by the IDF. I mean, I don't doubt that at all, and I think that's an important part of the story. But I do think that Hamas went into this very deliberately. I don't think that the killing of civilians or the hostage-taking, obviously, was a major aim of the operation. I don't think these were accidental, unintended features of it. It wasn't that that this was all completely improvised. There must have been a level of improvisation in it, but I think there was also behind it a deliberate policy of carrying out this sort of provocative attack on the civilian population in southern Israel, with the logic, that all Israelis are settlers. So we don't need to make the distinction between civilians and armed Israelis. And I think, coming from the tradition of international law and coming from the tradition of democratic politics and democratic resistance to oppression, that it's always very important to make that distinction between civilians and the armed enemy. So I mean, if Hamas had attacked Israeli military bases and killed Israeli soldiers, these questions would not arise. And they did attack military bases, and they did kill some Israeli soldiers, but they killed even more civilians. And so I think this is very troubling. But it's particularly troubling because of the way it exposed, not only troubling in itself, it's also troubling to the extent that it exposed the civilian population of Gaza to this huge Israeli overreaction and the genocide which we have seen in the last 2 years. I mean, we're now at the stage where Hamas's original actions are, in a sense, not so important because this has been going on for so long. It's so big. And Israel's response has mutated, I think, from what was initially a revenge and a desire to ensure that Hamas did not exist, and so that they could, which was a fantastical goal in itself, to a more ambitious strategic project of effectively destroying the Palestinian society and removing the Palestinians, if at all possible. So I think this initial argument is no longer, isn't as important now as it was in the days after October the 7th. But I still think that if we want to make an overall assessment of what's happened, that this is something we can't really avoid. I don't think it does any favors, really, to the Palestinian cause to minimize this aspect, to dismiss it, to believe that the resistance can do no wrong, because I think in this case the resistance made a big mistake, really.
Look, I agree with all of what you said. I want to shift topic a little bit and deal with the question of complicity in genocide, because in your essay you have this subsection on the perpetrator's block. So the UN Convention on Genocide, Article 3E, talks about complicity in genocide. There's a lot of governments here, including the one in this country, that have been complicit in genocide, just overtly, nakedly, clearly, I mean, the evidence is overwhelming. We're approaching the second anniversary of the genocide, and the arms are still flowing. Not only is the government supporting the American government, but the opposition party is also, I would argue, pro-genocidal. So, to put the question bluntly, do you agree that Joe Biden and Antony Blinken should have to go before a war crimes tribunal and answer the charge of complicity in genocide?
Certainly, certainly yes. And not only them, the leaders of Germany, the United Kingdom, and other Western countries also should have to face those charges, because although the United States has played the major role, I mean, the United States is the essential partner for Israel in this genocide. Without the US, this would not have happened.
Right.
And you can't quite say that of the other countries which have participated. But nevertheless, the extent of the international involvement in supplying the weapons, in supplying the political rationale, in supporting Israel at every twist and turn, in blocking attempts to alleviate the humanitarian suffering, all of this means that the complicity is very, very deep. And I think although I mean, in the end, we can't arraign everybody who is complicit before the ICC. I think it's important to think about the way in which the complicity has been spread throughout our societies, at least at the elite and the institutional level. And you know, particularly the role of media organizations, the mainstream or legacy media, who in most cases, in most Western countries, have you know, from the start bought the Israeli story, have repressed the voices of Palestinians and Palestinian advocates, have covered the genocide in a way that systematically minimizes the character of the violence and the responsibility, even the responsibility of the Israelis for the killing. All those articles which say, you know, people killed in Gaza, not Israel has killed people in Gaza. All that sort of stuff. It means, and this is really why I think this question of complicity, it goes beyond the question of who should go to The Hague. It really is a profound moral and political challenge for our societies, really, that they have allowed, our institutions, our cultures have allowed this sort of involvement to occur. And that even now, I was telling Nader earlier today that I wrote an article a month or so ago where I was discussing the way in which there has been this big shift in opinion. You know, we now have something like half the public recognizing there is a genocide. Many liberal media outlets have started to use the word genocide and publish articles and even editorials which say that genocide is happening. But people are not following through. People are not saying, you know, if it's genocide, that means we should cut off all support for Israel. If it's genocide, that means we cannot regard Israel as an ally. We can't have all these links with Israel. We need to break these links. If it's genocide, we need to intervene to stop it. You know, if in any other case, when there has been credible evidence of genocide, the sort of people who are avoiding these questions in Western societies, some of them at least would be putting forward serious demands that something needs to be done. And there are so many people today, even though they are beginning to recognize the genocidal character of what Israel is doing, who are not doing that.
One final question, and then I will open it up to the audience, and this is about the future of sort of this particular event. And you write at the end of your article that the Gaza genocide is a fundamental historical event. And while the fate awaiting the Palestinians in Gaza remains almost unimaginably grim, and the Israeli threat to the rest of Palestine and the surrounding peoples have dramatically increased, it might seem foolish to emphasize the positives. But at the same time, Gaza has also shown the extraordinary resilience of the Palestinians, and Israel has not had everything its own way. It hoped to seal the Strip by excluding global media, but Gaza's citizens have used mobile phones to record genocide in real time, making this the first live-stream genocide. Gaza has become the cause of young people in the 2020s, as Vietnam was for your generation in the late 1960s. Could you elaborate?
Yes, well, it is difficult to be truly hopeful, because we see every day what Israel is doing, and no evidence of their willingness to end it, and it's very difficult to credit that this latest so-called deal in the White House is going to lead to Israel stopping anytime soon. I think it's almost certain that in some way Hamas's response, whatever that is, will be used to provide a pretext for Israel to carry on, if Netanyahu can at all manage to do that. And there's nothing really to suggest that Trump or anybody else is going to stop him. So I am not very optimistic about the present turn of events. It would be nice to be proved wrong, but I really, it seems very uncertain to me that the killing is going to stop. And even if the killing stops, the disaster which has happened will remain. And without the sort of plan which is not contained in the Trump proposals, that disaster, I think, will still be very, very dire for a long time to come. But what is hopeful is the fact that the extent to which the Palestinians have managed to retain some dignity in this terrible situation, and the level of support throughout the world for them, which is not only manifested in gatherings like this, but I mean the Italian dock workers who are trying to get a European-wide blockade of arms to Israel. I mean, these sorts of initiatives from ordinary people in countries across the world, the bravery of the people in the flotilla, and the fact that some governments are now have been pressured into providing some sort of military protection for them, or cover for them. Whether that works or not, we don't know. But I mean, there is movement. The fact that so many governments, not in the United States, but in other Western countries, are now so embarrassed by the exposure of Israel's crimes and by the level of popular disillusionment with Israel, that they feel the need to criticize. Now, I mean, we've discussed this earlier, that they criticize, like my own government in the UK is doing. They criticize what Israel is doing. They, in very general terms, they say how terrible it is, the humanitarian situation of the Palestinians, but they carry on selling weapons. They carry on providing diplomatic cover of various kinds. They carry on business as usual in some ways, in many ways, with the Israeli government. So this is going on, but it is getting more and more difficult. You will recall at the time of the Democratic Convention here during the presidential election, how the Democratic National Committee and the Harris campaign shamefully excluded even loyal democratic pro-Palestinian voices from the convention platform. Well, we're facing a similar situation in the UK at the moment. The ruling Labour Party is holding its conference, and lots of local parties had submitted resolutions opposing what Israel is doing and demanding that it be recognised as genocide by the British government. And they very seriously attempted to stop these resolutions being discussed, but they are being discussed. I don't know how well they'll go in the next hours or days. Sorry, they have approved. Oh, they have approved. Yeah, a little bit behind. Well done. So I mean, whether this will help people in Gaza today or tomorrow, I doubt. But I think it will help to change the situation in the months and years to come, and hopefully sooner rather than later.
And the last thing I'll say before I open it up to the audience is that there's quite a bit of evidence now to suggest that had the Democratic Party and Kamala Harris in the last presidential election spoken with greater moral clarity on Gaza,
Yes.
that could have made a difference in terms of the election result.
Yeah.
So that's significant to sort of point out. And the last thing to give people hope, because there's a lot of darkness enveloping this conversation in this country, but the one area of hope that I see is in New York City with Zoran Mamdani.
Yes.
The Zoran Mamdani phenomenon is incredibly sort of hopeful as a moral example. What's interesting about it is that he doesn't talk about Gaza on his own. It's not like he's campaigning on that platform. It's other people try to sort of pin him down, and then he just speaks in the language of honesty, moral clarity, and universal human rights. That yes, if Netanyahu steps into the city, we're not going to have a war criminal who's been indicted before the International Criminal Court to walk freely among us. And I believe that Palestinians and Israelis are entitled to the same human rights. And what's interesting is that resonates with New Yorkers, including among a significant amount of Jewish New Yorkers himself, including Jewish New Yorkers, young people mostly, but also people who said, he says that on Israel, it might not be my preference, but I don't mind it. I'm more interested in his political platform and his campaign of affordability and his moral integrity. That is to be contrasted with Mario Cuomo, who's basically just a creep. So that goes a long way in American politics, and it's a hopeful model that we can perhaps reproduce in other cities. So with that as a preliminary set of comments, we'll open the floor open to the audience, and we'll start with Andy Shalal.
Thank you so much. What an interesting conversation. Really appreciate it. I wanted to ask you about, I was fascinated by you saying that Hamas also had committed a genocide. How does capacity to undergo genocide play into determining whether or not someone is actually committing a genocide? Because if the idea of eradicating a society, with Hamas's capabilities, that wasn't going to happen. It was impossible. I'm trying to understand, where do you draw the line to say that someone who has been under occupation in a very horrible way is unable to fight in many different ways? And of course, we know that the Palestinians in Gaza have tried many different approaches to try to end the occupation. None of them have worked, only made things worse. There's always that mowing the lawn every so often where several hundred, maybe a couple thousand people get killed. So that's one question. And the other question, just quickly, because I want to get two in, is how much do you think the fact that, let's say, France, the UK, Canada, Australia, they're recognizing a Palestinian state, how much of that do you think is for them to try to distance themselves from the fact that they're complicit in this genocide, i.e. eradicating a society, and sort of seeing the writing on the wall and the possibility of The Hague, as you said? How much of that is playing into their decision of saying, we recognize Palestinians, but we continue to support Israel?
Okay. Well, maybe the second question is easier to answer than the first. I think the answer to the second question is that they are, to a considerable extent, they're using the question of recognition as a way of continuing to avoid any serious break with Israel over Gaza. And to that extent, I mean, recognition, obviously, in principle, is an advance, but in the circumstances of what is actually happening to Palestinians in Gaza today, if you are not at the same time taking effective action to try to stop that, and collectively these countries that you're talking about have considerable leverage, and they may not have the leverage that the US has. They can't, as Donald Trump could do, simply say no, stop it. But they could make life very difficult for Israelis and especially for the Israeli government. And so I think they could make a difference. And I think their actions, if they were more robust, they would make a difference to Trump's position. But they're not doing that, because basically most of these governments are not only deeply connected to Israel, but they're also frightened of Trump, and they're not willing to challenge Trump for other reasons. Yeah.
If I can just follow up with that.
Yeah.
Does it give them any legal cover
No.
by
No.
saying that?
No. They're separate issues. So no. If you are complicit in genocide, you're complicit in genocide. Whatever other fine political, principles you sign up to. Now, the question about Hamas, I think the question of capacity is important. Clearly, Hamas didn't have the capacity to commit a large-scale genocide of Israelis, and they didn't intend to do that. They intended to, as far as one can make out, they intended to carry out a very provocative, in comparative terms, relatively small-scale massacre, although, from the point of view of a provocation against the Israeli state, a very large provocation. So this is why I explained this more in the lecture I gave at Georgetown today. I use different terminology. I would say that Israel has committed a genocide in the sense of a large-scale episode of very long duration and with an overall strategy of the destruction of the Palestinian society in Gaza. So that is something different from what Hamas did. Hamas carried out what I call a genocidal massacre, which is a short-term, limited in scale event, which is very destructive in the immediate context, but which doesn't carry on, which we didn't have the potential to carry on. And there are many examples of this. Just this year in Sudan, in a place called Zamzam in Darfur, the Rapid Support Forces massacred the Masalit people trapped in camps there. We could call that a genocidal massacre. In Syria, in Latakia and in Sweden, there were massacres by forces linked more or less to the new regime in Syria. In none of these cases, especially in the Syrian cases, was there an attempt to do this on a larger scale or with a grander scheme. So these are also similar massacres. But the people who were killed in these massacres were identified more or less in terms of their ethnicity or their religion. They were identified in sectarian terms. And in that sense, I think it's a useful term to talk about these sorts of events, which are not at the scale of a genocide of the kind that Israel has committed, but which nevertheless have the same sort of driver in a way, or the same sort of identification of a civilian group as an enemy to be destroyed, even if only in a local situation.
So I just want to say for the rules for the audience, if you own this bookstore, you get 2 questions. If you don't, you only get 1. Four more. Okay. We'll come around. So the floor is open. Yeah, right here at the front.
Hi. Okay, so I practice private international law, so I look at this from a legal perspective.
Yeah, sure.
And so one of the things that I have noticed, and I've been looking into just mass atrocities in general, I think like the Guatemala genocide is an interesting example to look at because it went over for 30 years. And if you look at individual, those, you might not call it a genocide looking at one village, but they were genocidal massacres in your language. And I think that from a legal perspective, it seems like the Genocide Convention has failed because when you look at Lemkin's work and you look at the statute as written, the goal is to prevent it even before a single killing happens. Killing is one of the things that can constitute genocide, but there are other things.
Yeah.
And then when you look at Article 3, conspiracy to commit genocide, attempt to commit genocide, and direct and public incitement to commit genocide, those are punishable crimes that are supposed to preclude, or like go before and preclude. And so I'm just wondering, in your scholarship, have you thought about why has this failed? What would you change about this definition or add to it to make it actually work in terms of preventing genocide and not just 30 years later saying that was a genocide?
Well, it's a very good question. There isn't a simple answer to it. I am critical of the Genocide Convention in some respects, and I'm also critical of the way in which the International Court of Justice and other courts have interpreted the convention, especially on the question of intention to commit genocide. But I would still have to say that that convention, even with its flaws, is robust enough in principle to catch most of the cases in which genocide is committed and most of the perpetrators. And there's no doubt in my mind, and I think in the mind of most people who have thought about it, that the Israeli government is guilty of genocide in legal terms. Not in mind about other terms. In legal terms, if the International Criminal Court was to charge Netanyahu with genocide, and if he was to be tried, I think he would be convicted. And if the ICJ, when the ICJ gets round to it, which in the nature of things does take a long time, I think it's very likely they will find that Israel has committed genocide, although there may be all sorts of let-outs. So, but the real question, I think, is really the assumption that having a good law on the statute book is enough. Really, it isn't, unfortunately, and especially it isn't in international law. The Genocide Convention was adopted in 1948. It was adopted at a time when the Zionist movement was already expelling Palestinians from their villages and towns. It was adopted at a time when the different factions in India, in the British Empire in India, had the Muslim and Hindu-based political organizations and paramilitaries had expelled millions and millions of people in the period in which the UN was drafting this convention, and in Europe, German civilians were being expelled en masse. Millions of them again, hundreds of thousands were killed in a sort of revenge for the Nazi genocide against Eastern European peoples. And so all this was going on, and it was known to be going on. And the great powers which implemented, which were involved in drafting the Genocide Convention, the United States, Britain, the Soviet Union, were either directly or indirectly involved in these cases, and in very important ways. In Palestine, because of the partition plan, the UN itself was very seriously involved. And yet, during the drafting of the convention, very little was made of this. Attempts were made by Arab states, for example, to raise Palestine, that were largely dismissed. Even Raphael Lemkin, who invented the term genocide and was the big intellectual driver of the move towards the convention, didn't want these issues to be raised in the context of the drafting process because it might upset the drafting process. It may make the great UN powers more reluctant to approve the convention. So, right from the start, the whole thing was compromised. Not so much in the words of the convention, although there are problems with it, but in the intentions we lay behind it. I quoted this afternoon the historian Mark Rozoa, who says that the convention and other instruments of the post-war international order were promissory notes not intended to be cashed. There were fine words, there were the result of the feeling among the leaders of the great powers and in intellectual circles that something needed to be done to recognize the deficiencies of the international order, to recognize the horror of what had been done during the Second World War, the Holocaust, but a lot of other things as well. But not really with a serious intention of doing anything about it. And of course, there was supposed to be, at the time all this was being discussed, there was talk about having an international criminal court. It should have been set up by 1950. It didn't happen until the year 2000. And then, of course, even though many countries signed up to it, the United States didn't, China didn't, Russia didn't, and so on. So we live in this very, very imperfect world where an awful lot of power is concentrated in the hands of people who have no interest in human rights and no desire to rectify wrongs even when they recognize those wrongs. And having the Genocide Convention is an important benchmark that we can use to hold people to account, but it isn't sufficient. You need the political force, the momentum behind it, and that's another question.
Okay, let's go at the back, and then we'll come at the front. Yeah, right at the back. Just keep your hand up. Keep your hand up, yeah.
Hi, thank you. Something that I've always thought of is this idea that slavery within the United States compared to the Holocaust, the difference to me has always been that the Holocaust was a genocide that was filmed versus slavery in the United States was not. And outside of these legal terms, to piggyback off of the previous question, why do you think it's so hard for people to acknowledge this idea of genocide going on in Gaza currently in like day-to-day conversations when we have so many examples of genocide leading back to slavery in the United States, the Guatemala genocide? We have so many examples of it, but yet it seems like even saying genocide in Gaza today is a trigger word for people, or they don't even want to acknowledge it.
Yeah, I think the word genocide has the association of the ultimate horror, the ultimate crime. I think in the case of a lot of people, certainly people in positions of power and influence and people who have thought about it, I think the denial of genocide now, at least, is mostly because they support Israel or because they don't want to do anything effective about what Israel is doing. So I think it is politically motivated. I mean, it may be true that among ordinary people that you might talk to, there's a lot of confusion about the idea. There has been a lot of misinformation about the idea, and so in the population as a whole, there may be many people who recognize that what Israel is doing is terrible, but are still not sure that it's a genocide. But I don't think that's really so much the case at the elite level. I think your mention of slavery and the Holocaust is very interesting. I mean, the Holocaust wasn't actually filmed at the time by the Nazis carried it on behind closed doors without directly admitting what they were doing, and it was only filmed in the sense that when the Allies liberated the camps, they were able to film the piles of bodies and the emaciated survivors, and the story started to come out. Clearly, this is something which has happened in recent times. It's something which has been committed by a state, the Nazi Germany, which the United States and Britain and other countries fought against. So we have the myth, certainly in the United Kingdom, we have the myth that Britain helped to defeat the Nazi Germany and end the Holocaust. That this is a major national myth. So obviously it's very easy to say how terrible the Holocaust is. Whereas slavery in the United States is something that was done by the United States, or by a large section of United States society, and it's it's a horror which still lives on in some ways in the way your society works, and I mean, all this better than me. I don't really need to explain it to you. So I think that's really the bottom line there. That there are people in American politics today, American society today, who want to deny slavery because basically they sympathize with quite a lot of the ideas that went into it.
Okay, you had right here. Wait for the microphone. Yeah. Wait for the microphone, and then you're next. Yeah. Go ahead.
Thank you. My wife was supposed to join me, and she regrets that she couldn't make it. But I told her before the show, or the presentation, that you believe October 7th was genocide. Right. She was horrified, or shocked. Yes. And then she immediately texted me a question. So I'm going to read the question to you.
All right, okay, yes.
It seems that on October 7th, only 2 of the 5 acts of genocide, as defined by 1948 Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, was committed. 1, killing members of the group, and 2, causing them seriously bodily or mental harm. Do you believe that Hamas committed genocide because it committed just 2 of the 5 acts that meets the definition of genocide?
Well, the simple answer to that is that in law, an actor would only have to commit one of those acts as long as they did it with the intention. The intention is really the key thing, because those acts, killing people who belong to a particular group, that could be carried out in all sorts of circumstances, in war. That happened, as we were talking about in Vietnam. The United States killed millions of Vietnamese. But whether they had the intention to destroy the group as a whole is another question. So that's the short answer to this. It really goes back to the discussion we've already had. That what Hamas did, I think, it comes within is the type of action that could count as genocide. But it's of a scale and of a duration which doesn't match what we talk about as a genocide, in the sense of a large and strategically planned event of the kind that Israel has committed. So that's where I see a difference.
I had to ask the question.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. Or else you couldn't go home tonight.
Yes.
Exactly.
Well,
your wife texted you.
My wife is sitting behind you, and I think she was admiring the back of your T-shirt earlier. And
at the back, the next question at the back. Yeah, right there. Go ahead.
Thanks. This is another 2-parter, so hopefully it's permissible. The first is, when we're in this discussion about genocide and we're having a comparison in which Hamas has killed and kidnapped hundreds, and then we're comparing this to like 60,000, I guess I'm curious, what is the purpose in using the same term when we are talking about differentials of power, oppression, and capacity? And then I might have misunderstood your framing of Hamas, but it seems that you've categorized Hamas altogether as this undemocratic organization that doesn't care about everyday Gazans. And so I'm curious, then how do you contend with 2006 political elections, or the fact that many Hamas people are people's relatives? They're their brothers, their husbands, their fathers. And so what does this vast characterization of Hamas do to already sort of enforce and lead to our narratives of who is a terrorist and who is not? Because I don't hear that same categorization made to the Israeli occupation forces, as they do not care about Israeli citizens, even when we see Israeli citizens standing up for resistance against what their political party is doing.
Well, if it comes to it, I don't think that the Israeli government does care very much about ordinary Israeli victims of the conflict that's going on.
Or even the hostages.
Well, I was going to mention the hostages. Yes, very obviously the hostages. Many Israeli hostages would have been released if Netanyahu had not been determined on carrying on his campaign against Hamas if he had been willing to negotiate. I mean, clearly Hamas was willing to free more hostages, but it was the Israelis who stopped it. So what I'm saying about Hamas does not in any way mean that I'm exonerating or minimizing the character of the Israeli regime. I mean, I think it's a murderous, genocidal regime, which I mean, I wouldn't want to be living under that regime. I think if you read the accounts of the few people in Israel who really do care about the Palestinians and who recognize what is happening. I mean, it is. I mean, it's not obviously as bad for them as the Palestinians themselves, but they experience this as living in a society which is is sort of genocidally mad. I think we could say, in which genocide is so normalized that it's impossible to raise normal sort of moral questions. As far as Hamas is concerned, though, I mean, I was talking about October the 7th. I wasn't talking about Hamas. I mean, I would say overall, Hamas is basically an authoritarian organization, and I think, I mean, it certainly embraced democracy in 2006, but I don't think it is a fundamentally democratic organization. I would agree that there is more to Hamas. I mean, I think, Hamas is an organization which, because it has run Gaza for so long, and it is responsible for the running of the state institutions in Gaza and the public institutions generally, and because it has a civilian political wing as well as a military wing. It includes many ordinary Palestinians and people who are trying simply to make the place work as well as it can. So I mean, I'm not trying to simply put the word terrorist on it. And if the word terrorist belongs anywhere, it belongs much more, I think, to the Israeli government. But I don't think these simple labels are the answer here. But what I am saying is, whatever else Hamas has done, that what it did on October the 7th was deeply problematic from a moral, but also from a strategic and political point of view.
So here's just to press that home, that point a bit further. The question would be, historically and politically, what's the appropriate comparison that we can be making and should be making between what's happening in Gaza, Hamas, and other cases of groups that are in a similar situation, fighting for independence, fighting against a colonial occupation? So, for example, the Vietnamese resistance, they were deeply authoritarian. Yeah. Do you know how many people that the Viet Cong killed, other Vietnamese that were killed in Vietnam? And when they defeated the Americans, what did they do? They established a deeply authoritarian regime. So I think that in many ways tends to be much more the historical norm than the one that you cited, the African National Congress. Wouldn't it be great if all of these national liberation organizations, including Hamas, followed that model? But I think in many ways that's the exception to the rule, not the norm. So how can we think about this in sort of, I guess, deeper historical ways and ways that are more reflective of actually the situation? And like Andy said, Palestinians in Gaza, with Hamas's approval, did try nonviolent resistance. The Great March of Return in 2018 was overwhelmingly a nonviolent movement that Hamas either had a role in, but they didn't stop, and the Israelis massacred, the citizens there. So how can we sort of think about this question of, national liberation struggle, anti-colonial resistance in ways that perhaps are a bit more nuanced than you presented during your answer?
Okay. Well, I mean, it is a big and complex question. I mean, as I said, I was around during the Vietnam War, and we were having these discussions then. We knew that the National Liberation Front was an authoritarian Stalinist organization, as we call it, and that if it came to power, it would create a dictatorship, which it did. We supported it against the United States, but with, as I think we said at the time, without illusions. Without some of us anyway. Some people had illusions, and I suppose that's part of my thing here. That even if we're going to give support to these sorts of movements and organizations, we should not cultivate illusions in them. We shouldn't pretend that they're something which they're not. Even the African National Congress actually was quite an authoritarian organization in many ways, although there's a difference actually. I suppose there's a difference between being somewhat authoritarian, or even being very authoritarian, and carrying out what I would regard as a genocidal massacre. That has not been, I mean, there are certainly many cases in history where the oppressed have massacred their oppressors. And as I said, almost always suffered in response hugely greater massacres and violence, if not genocide, as retribution. I could talk about this if you want. I think, though, that if we're talking about modern nationalist movements, that there are, and especially movements which are operating in a context like Palestine, which is in such a global media gaze, and where the success of the national movement depends considerably on maintaining its international support. You know, I mean, Palestine's a small place. The Palestinians are not a big people. They need the support which they get internationally, and I think what was done on October 7th was it's not easy to find very direct comparisons for that. Other resistance movements have carried out all sorts of crimes, but I don't think they've done quite the same thing in quite the same context and with quite the same negative effects. Because not only negative effects in the sense of the sort of retribution which they helped to bring on the Palestinian people in Gaza, which is a very, very serious matter, but also negative effects in terms of providing the Israeli government with the pretext and with the international legitimacy to carry, so that Israel could say, we're acting in self-defense. Well, right, they weren't acting in self-defense, but at a superficial level, that was plausible, and it was something which every other Western government was prepared to repeat ad nauseum. And make people accept it. It's taken almost 2 years for people to see through that. So I suppose that's my answer.
There was a question at the back. You had your hand up, and then we're going to wrap it up, and then you're next. Okay. Maybe.
Yeah. When do reparations kick in for something like this, and who is held responsible? I think the asymmetry in this, and certainly what happened in October was not in a vacuum. But the amount of institutional destruction, naming something a genocide carries with it some responsibilities, and one of them are acts of restitution, and who kicks in the money for that, and would the arms supplier also be responsible? I mean, there's not much left in Gaza right now, and certainly the United States is hardly a model democracy, so I think we need to be careful about, criticizing other forms of governance.
Okay, well, I also come from an imperfect democracy, so I suppose you're right. We certainly need to avoid pretending that what we have is good and perfect, and that the problem is movements like Hamas. I mean, I'm not intending to do that. I think in the bigger scheme of things, what Hamas is and has done, the negative aspects of that pale into insignificance compared to what Israel has done, and and indeed what the United States and other Western countries have done. So I agree with that. I think the question about reparations is an important one, and restitution, and you know, there's no legal template really there. I think I'm right in saying you know, it doesn't, just because you establish that somebody or political leaders or states have committed genocide or responsible for genocide, doesn't trigger an automatic requirement for them to compensate for that. But I think from a moral point of view, from a political point of view, that is what we should be saying. And people have been saying it. People have said from the beginning of this that Israel, you know, not only needs to be made accountable, and Israeli leaders need to be made accountable, but that Israel should be paying to put this right and to restore the conditions for Palestinians in Gaza to live in you know, in dignity in a normal way. Yeah.
So the last question right here. Okay, sorry. Is there a question right there? Yeah, go ahead. Second to last question, and then yeah.
Thanks, and not to beat a dead horse, but it's about intent again, because, and I might be naive, but it seems like the operation was planned to capture hostages, to take military targets. You know, the music festival was happening, and so it turned into something else, and many people were killed, and it's a war crime, and it's deeply troubling, and all the other descriptions that we've used to describe it. But I'm not sure it shows the intent that you described in terms of genocide. So I don't know, maybe I just don't understand.
The other way of putting it, why not just call October 7th a grotesque war crime and not use genocidal massacre? Because
the other thing,
yeah, go ahead.
The other thing is, a lot of the people that were held were not Israelis or Jewish. So, if, you know, they were from Nepal, they were from other countries as well that happened to be...
Which raises a question about intent to destroy a group. Yeah.
And it was planned by
It was just anyone who was there, yeah.
It was planned by local Hamas, not like international Hamas. It was Yahya Sinwar, who'd been a released hostage, so that was the strategy.
So we've
I don't know.
Yeah. So we're going over terrain that we've covered. Do you want to add anything more?
Well, the fact that that this was some leaders of Hamas rather than others doesn't really alter the question. I mean, it's those who planned this operation, in my view, must have countenanced the killing of Israeli civilians on a significant scale. I don't think it could have happened the way it did without it. And the fact that I did mention that Thais and other people were among the people who were killed and who were taken hostage, but they were a small minority of the you know, and the general. I mean, clearly in a situation like that, Hamas wasn't going to take the trouble to check the identities of each and every person they came across. But the general remit was to take hostages and to kill where necessary. I think it's very difficult to gainsay that. But as I say, this was always planned. This can only have been planned. We don't know exactly how it's planned, but we know what we know. It can only have been planned as a limited venture, really, a short-term, dramatic intervention. And you know, it was dramatic, and it did work in those terms. But the reason one of the reasons I think it's important to recognise this is because that it helps to explain why Israel behaved the way it did in response. You know, because of this character of it, that Israeli civilians were killed as Israeli civilians because they were Israelis in significant numbers. This seems to me is a fundamental part of why Israel launched the sort of campaign it did. And you can compare other situations where political leaders have been humiliated by their failures to prevent things happening. You think about 9/11, and you have George W. Bush immediately attacking Afghanistan and destroying the Taliban regime as well as the Al-Qaeda camps. You think about Vladimir Putin when the Ukrainian pro-Russian president was ousted in 2014. He was humiliated by that, and his immediate reaction was, we'll take Crimea and we'll support the separatists in eastern Ukraine and start this war. So you have many examples of this where leaders are humiliated. They go over the top and they respond in a big way. And the killing of hundreds of civilian members of a population, especially in a society like Israel, with the easy connections made with pogroms in the past and as well as the Holocaust, it was inevitable, in my view, that it would trigger a huge response, a hugely destructive and murderous response against the Palestinians, and that Hamas must have recognized this, or certainly ought to have recognized it.
Last question. Right here.
Anyway, before speaking of humiliation, I have a very deep presentation on humiliation, which is primary, and Evelyn Linder calls humiliation the atom bomb of the emotions. And my presentation is about the Palestinians live slow, inescapable, enduring humiliation over generations, and Israel had a sudden top-down, like 9/11 and Pearl Harbor, and then they go berserk. So, in summary, and Israel had a right to self-defense on October 7th, which they did not exercise on that day. But anyway, my question, I wanted to sort of tie in why it's so hard why people have a hard time calling this one a genocide as compared to other genocides and tied in to slavery. And I'm very preoccupied with my responsibility as a Jew and dealing with the Jewish community, and very intensely, but there's also the role of Christian Zionism, and I think that Israel is an archetypal realm. It's not like another country. So like from birth, like Jews and Christians grow up like Israel in the Bible, and it has this precognitive symbolic meaning, and like Huckabee saying, if you bless, you will be blessed, and if you curse, it will be cursed. So if they don't give money to Israel, like they're going to go to hell. I mean, it's on a completely different dimension. So I want.
So your argument is that the reason why some people are reluctant to criticize Israel and what it's doing in Gaza is because of a Christian Zionist sort of framing?
Jews too, like you say, Shema Yisrael, that Israel, it's sort of like from infancy, before you have any consciousness, Israel has this.
So there is almost a theological sort of inhibition.
It's not theological. I mean, it's psychological.
It's psychological,
but there's a charge on it that's not.
And that's part of the part of the explanation
it's not rational,
right?
And I mean, I want to say something.
Okay, that's good. That's a good question. What do you think?
Well, I broadly agree with that. I mean, I think Israel is a very peculiar polity, really. Its legitimacy has become bound up and has been deliberately made to be bound up with the Holocaust and which I mean, that's been described as a sacred evil. It's something that people want to worship as evil, to commemorate as the supreme evil, and that understanding, I mean, is not only held by many Jews, but also, of course, has been spread throughout, especially Western countries, especially in the United States. It has become something which has been institutionalized and embedded in culture. Even in the United Kingdom, the only international historical events that children definitely learn about in school really are the Second World War and the Holocaust. That's the only thing you can guarantee that they will have heard of, and so this is very much linked into our cultures and our politics in ways which is very different from virtually anything else. So I agree. I think that's a big part of the problem. But what I mean, we were looking for silver linings in this. I think the legitimacy of Israel has been enormously damaged by what they have done over the last 2 years, and the fact that we now have a very large percentage of the population in many countries, including the US, who recognize that Israel has committed genocide is something which doesn't bode well for Israel unless it changes very, very radically. It is going to face, I think, very huge problems of legitimacy. Yeah, including many Jews. Yes, definitely, and Jews in Europe as well. I think is true as well. Yeah. No. And so I think this is this is another way in which this genocide has changed the world. Really, it has changed the perception of Israel particularly. All this capital, if you like, moral and political capital that Israel has built up over the preceding decades has been risked very, very seriously. And there are many people in Israel, I think, who recognize that. I mean, I think in the elite circles, in the last few months especially, there has been a turning and there's been a recognition that it's gone too far. They were prepared to see this go on for a while, but when Netanyahu wasn't willing to compromise, to get the hostages back and to stop it, some of them started to see that really this was risking the whole legitimacy of the Israeli state. And I think that there's a big element of truth in that.
Martin, according to my clock, it is 12:44 back in England.
Yes.
So it's safe to say it's way past your bedtime. So I want to thank you for making the trip, and his wife's bedtime. Thank you for making the trip over from England. The key to changing the world, our world, and particularly stopping this genocide, is to educate and then to organize. And so thank you for educating us on this topic. We're hoping that your presence here will lead to organization to stop, this gross moral obscenity in Gaza and lead to a better future for, the people of Palestine generally. So thank you for being here.
Well, thank you. And thank you again, Nader and Andy and everyone here, and everybody who's come this evening and made this such an interesting session. I'm glad I'm here, and I think I must have overcome some of the jet lag to still be, yes, asking this song.
Okay, I also just wanted to let everyone know that we have one of Martin's books, Genocide and International Relations, here available for purchase. Also to the side, you'll see a little document talking about his newest release, The New Age of Genocide, which I believe comes out very soon. So please come to our table and take a look at that. For anyone who has books or wants to purchase books and wants to get them signed tonight, we're going to have you sit on the stage for the signing. We'll clear that table off for you so you can sign anyone's books who have brought books or want to buy books here tonight. And with that, thank you all again. Please make sure to tip your server if we did a good job, and have a great rest of your night. Thank you.